For the empire, there was chaos. Actium decides the fate of empires. Rome was never just a city. In the previous episode of the Complete History of Ancient Rome, Julius Caesar fell under the statue of Pompey, stabbed by his own friend. And this is the beginning of a new battle for power. Chaos in the streets, Rome in freefall. The assassins expected to be hailed as heroes. Instead, the city turned on them. Caesar had not just ruled Rome, he had fed it, entertained it, and embodied its glory. The people mourned, rioted. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and master manipulator, delivered the funeral oration that would seal their fate. He held up Caesar's bloodied toga. He read his will, leaving money and land to the Roman people. He unleashed a fury that would devour the old order. The liberators, as they called themselves, fled Rome. And in the vacuum they left behind, a new player stepped forward, a teenager. Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew, barely 19 years old, but in his will, Caesar had named him his adopted son and heir. The boy took a new name, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. And with that name came destiny, the Game of Thrones. Octavian was young, soft-spoken, frail. No one saw him as a threat, but he had something far more powerful than strength, patience, cunning, and a legendary name. At first, he allied with Antony and Marcus Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned dictatorship of 3 men ruling the empire. Their first act? Proscription, a legalized purge. Enemies were listed, property seized, blood spilled in the streets. Even Cicero, the greatest orator of Rome, was executed. Then came Philippi, 42 BCE. Octavian and Antony crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius. The last defenders of the Republic were gone, but alliances built on blood rarely last. Lepidus was soon sidelined. Only Octavian and Antony remained. Rome wasn't big enough for both. Cleopatra returns. While Octavian stayed in Rome, Antony drifted east, to Egypt, to wealth, and to Cleopatra. Their affair became a scandal, a legend, a threat. Together they lived like gods. Their twins were named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the sun and the moon. Antony gifted her Roman lands, wore foreign dress, and even promised their children a share of the empire. To Octavian, this was treason. He launched a smear campaign, claiming Antony had fallen under Cleopatra's witchcraft, abandoned Roman virtues, and planned to move the capital to Alexandria. Rome seethed. In 32 BCE, Octavian took a bold step. He read Antony's secret will aloud to the Senate, revealing all. The message was clear. This was not just a war for power. It was a war for the soul of Rome. Actium, the final gamble. Octavian's forces faced Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet in the Battle of Actium, a colossal naval showdown that would decide the fate of the world. At first, it was chaos. Ships clashed, arrows darkened the sky. But then, in a twist that remains debated to this day, Cleopatra's fleet suddenly withdrew. Antony, torn between duty and desire, broke formation and followed her. Disaster. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, seized the moment and crushed the remaining ships. The war was over in a single day. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, but Rome was coming. In August 30 BCE, Octavian's legions reached Alexandria. Facing certain defeat, Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, days later, took her own life. A snake's bite, or perhaps poison, still debated. Their bodies were buried together, their empire gone. Octavian entered the city, not as a conqueror, but as a silent shadow. There were no triumphs, no parades, only the weight of history settling on his shoulders. He was now the master of the Roman world, but he would not call himself king. The birth of empire. In 27 BCE, Octavian addressed the Senate. With humility, he offered to return all power to the Republic. It was a masterstroke. The senators, grateful or afraid, or both, begged him to stay. And so the boy who had once wept at Caesar's death became the first Roman emperor. But he did not take that title. He took another, Augustus, the revered one. With Augustus, the Republic ended, not with a scream, but with a whisper wrapped in glory. The Senate still met. The laws still passed. But now everything flowed from the will of one man. Under Augustus, Rome entered a golden age, the Pax Romana, 200 years of relative peace, prosperity, and imperial expansion. He rebuilt temples, he reformed the army, he turned a city of brick into a city of marble. But the cost was steep. Freedom was sacrificed for stability, dissent silenced for unity. The Republic became a memory, kept alive only by statues and speeches. The empire had begun, and history would never be the same. The rising action of the Roman story is not one of simple ascent. It is a slow, relentless fall wrapped in triumph. The transformation of liberty into empire, ideals into idols, and men into myths. All the while, the world watched, and many wondered, was this greatness, or merely survival dressed as glory? The Republic was dead, but the Empire was just awakening. The year is 9 CE. The Roman Empire stands at its greatest extent yet under Augustus. From the wilds of Britannia to the deserts of Africa, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, Roman banners fly high. Roads stretch like veins through the body of the known world. Legions march with precision, governed by iron discipline and eternal ambition. Rome has conquered the Mediterranean, but there is one region, dense, wild, and untamed, that remains a thorn in the empire's side. Germania, the edge of the world. To Roman minds, Germania was chaos incarnate. Endless forests, misty swamps, and fierce tribal warriors who refused to kneel. Rome had tried to civilize them, to coax them into becoming client kingdoms. Roads were built, taxes levied. Sons of tribal chiefs were educated in Roman ways, taught to speak Latin, wear the toga, and obey Roman law. One such youth was Arminius. He was raised as a Roman, trained in Roman strategy, fought as an officer in Roman campaigns. But blood remembers. And Arminius had not forgotten the humiliation of his people, the burning villages, the heavy tributes, the arrogance of governors. So when Augustus appointed a new general, Publius Quinctilius Varus, to govern Germania, Arminius smiled and waited. September 9 CE. A cold rain fell through the Teutoburg forest. Varus, leading 3 Roman legions, some 20,000 men, marched through the thick woods. He trusted Arminius, now one of his closest allies, who had warned of a local uprising and promised to guide the army safely. But the path narrowed, the trees closed in, wagons became stuck in the mud, thunder cracked overhead, and then chaos. From behind trees, under mossy ridges and above ridgelines, tribesmen surged, thousands, screaming, painted, wielding spears and axes. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Roman formation was impossible. The legions were strung out, vulnerable. Arminius had vanished, now leading the charge against them. Day turned to night and back again. Rain-soaked armor and blurred vision. For 3 days, the massacre continued. By the end, the legions were gone. Only a handful escaped to tell the tale. Most were butchered or enslaved. Many fell on their own swords to avoid capture. Even Varus, realizing the fate of his army, committed suicide. Rome had not just lost a battle, it had lost its pride. Worse than the death toll was the loss of the legionary eagles, the sacred standards carried into every battle. Each one represented the spirit of Rome. Their capture was not just a military disgrace, it was a spiritual catastrophe. When news reached Augustus, the aging emperor was devastated. According to Suetonius, for months he refused to cut his hair or shave and wandered the palace halls in anguish, crying, "Quintili var, legions rede." Varus, give me back my legions. But the legions were gone, buried in the mud of Teutoburg, picked apart by wolves and crows. It was Rome's greatest defeat in centuries. Teutoburg Forest was more than a military failure. It was the limit of Roman expansion. Augustus, once dreaming of pushing Rome's borders to the Elbe, abandoned the idea. The Rhine River became the de facto boundary, a line Rome would respect and defend for the next 4 centuries. Arminius became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of what it meant to refuse to be Romanized, a barbarian hero, a ghost in the woods. For the rest of his life, he would haunt Roman ambitions in the north. And Augustus, he lived on, but the fire had dimmed. The man who had once tamed a republic into an empire now saw that empire wounded, vulnerable. He had brought peace, but at a price. In the years that followed, Rome retaliated. Germanicus, adopted son of the new emperor Tiberius, led brutal revenge campaigns into Germania. Villages were burned, tens of thousands killed. 2 of the 3 lost eagle standards were recovered, but not all. Never all. Rome did not forget, but it did adapt. The legions were repositioned, fortifications improved, a more conservative foreign policy emerged. The empire would now hold, not stretch, rule, not gamble. Teutoburg had revealed the one thing Augustus had feared. Rome was not invincible. This was the climax of Rome's transformation, not just from republic to empire, but from a conquering city-state into a civilization tempered by trauma. The glory of Caesar had become the caution of Augustus. The dream of expansion gave way to the realism of rule. Rome, though still mighty, had seen the edge and recoiled. As the empire entered its 2nd generation of rule, it carried the weight of what had been gained and what had been lost forever. For Rome, the eagle had flown high, but now it knew how far it could fall. The bodies of Varus's legions had long since decomposed beneath the moss and mud of Teutoburg, but their ghost never left the Roman imagination. For a generation, Germania haunted the dreams of emperors. And yet, Rome endured. In fact, Rome thrived. By 100 CE, the Roman Empire had regained its footing, not through blind expansion, but through calculated consolidation. It had found a new rhythm, Not the furious drumbeat of conquest, but the steady cadence of empire. The chaos of civil wars was behind it. The Republic was a memory. In its place stood an imperial machine, more efficient, more stable, more Roman than ever before. What changed? After Augustus, emperors like Tiberius, Claudius, and Vespasian restructured the empire's bones. Roads were expanded, frontiers were fortified. The Roman legions were no longer just an instrument of conquest. They became the guardians of order. A new military doctrine emerged, defense in depth. Permanent camps, castra, were built along the Rhine and Danube, complete with stone walls, barracks, baths, and amphitheaters. These were not temporary occupations. They were statements of permanence. Where once Rome had chased glory in open fields, it now entrenched itself in stone. The civilization machine. Meanwhile, inside the empire, something extraordinary was unfolding. Romanization. From Spain to Syria, local elites adopted Latin names, wore togas, quoted Virgil, and sent their sons to study rhetoric in Roman schools. The empire began to function less like a conqueror and more like a culture factory. Cities became miniature Romes. Forums, temples, aqueducts, and baths brought Roman life to the provinces. Roman law replaced tribal custom. Roman coinage unified commerce. Roman citizenship became not just a legal status, but a dream. In 212 CE, under Caracalla, even that final barrier would vanish. All free men in the empire would be granted Roman citizenship. A world bound by Rome. By 100 CE, under the reign of Trajan, the Roman Empire was the largest it had ever been. It stretched from the green hills of Scotland to the burning sands of Arabia, from the vineyards of Gaul to the palm trees of Egypt. This was a hyper-connected world. A merchant in Alexandria could ship goods to Massilia. An order from the emperor could reach Judea in under 2 weeks. A Roman senator could retire to a villa in Asia Minor, sipping imported Spanish wine under the same laws as Rome itself. This wasn't just an empire of land, it was an empire of time, law, language, and identity. But it only endured because it had learned to adapt. The trauma of Teutoburg taught Rome a crucial lesson. Not all lands are worth conquering. The borders of the empire were not limits of ambition, but choices. A recognition of where power could be sustained and where it could not. In this way, Rome evolved. It was no longer the reckless youth slashing its way through Gaul. It had become something older, wiser, more deliberate. The empire had turned inward, not to retreat, but to refine. The Pax Romana. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, is often romanticized, but in the context of the ancient world, it was revolutionary. For 2 centuries, there was no large-scale civil war, no barbarian sack of Rome, no foreign empire challenging its supremacy. For the average citizen or subject, life under Rome could be harsh. Taxes were high, governors could be cruel, and slavery was endemic. But there was also order. Roads were safe, grain shipments were regular, rebellions were rare. In an age of chaos, Rome offered structure. In a world of tribes, it offered identity. This was no longer the story of a city clawing its way to dominance. This was the story of an empire learning to last. The Roman world of 100 CE would be almost unrecognizable to the citizen soldiers of the early Republic. And yet, it bore their name, their laws, their language. The Rome that emerged after Teutoburg was stronger, not because it kept expanding, but because it learned where to stop. The empire didn't collapse after its greatest defeat. It endured, it adapted, and in doing so, it transcended its origins. The Roman Empire may be gone, but listen closely, and its echoes still speak. From humble beginnings as a village by the Tiber River, Rome rose to dominate 3 continents. It forged laws that shaped civilizations, roads that still lie beneath modern cities, and ideals that, centuries later, would help birth republics, revolutions, and dreams of human order. But it was not its conquests that made Rome eternal. It was what it survived: civil wars, invasions, plagues, betrayals. Catastrophes like the Battle of Teutoburg could have broken a lesser state. But Rome adapted, again and again. It learned to hold. It learned to wait. It learned that true power isn't measured by expansion, but by endurance. And long after the legions marched their last, long after the emperors turned to dust, the idea of Rome lives on, in every senate that debates, in every nation that writes its laws, in every story of glory, hubris, and legacy. Because Rome wasn't just a place. Rome was a mirror, reflecting who we were, who we are, and who we could become. What do you think Rome's greatest legacy is? Is it law, language, architecture, or the simple, staggering ambition to bring order to chaos? Let us know in the comments. And if you felt the weight of Rome's rise and fall through this story, subscribe to Echoes of the Past for more epic journeys through human history. Hit the bell so you never miss any Echoes of the Past stories, because history is more than just the past.